Thanks, listeners, for joining us on a beautiful Monday. I'm your host, Lori Gilbert, for our weekday radio show. And today's guest is going to get us caught up on all things history in Elko. That's right, it's local historian Jan Petersen, who we invite to pop in every time she has a spare moment, Jan, so you can bring us up to date on all the latest. So I'll have you sit up close to that microphone.
Oh, I'll move up closer.
Thank you so much, and welcome. Thanks for filling in at the last minute as you usually do. She's on the fly. Yes, she's a great sub. So, yes. So, but really, truly, though, it is important to acknowledge publicly your retirement.
I did retire. I retired as director of the Cowboy Arts and Gear Museum at 542 Commercial Street on February 28th. And it's been a wonderful and glorious 6.5 years putting the thing together. It was a team effort. There was John and Susan Wright. Tana Gallagher kept the books all those years, my right-hand woman that did all the brain stuff and all the book work, and I can't thank Tana enough for all of that. And then my husband helped, and we had great volunteers. Sue Abel came in, Loretta Reed came in, the Jigs Maggie Club came, Deanna Peters and Cheryl Turner were just invaluable at stepping in when I needed a little break now and then or something came up. And then Rick Berkeley, who passed away in November, worked there 2.5 years, and he knew more than me, and he was having a great time being back in the loop as it was. So it was just a great endeavor, but I just had other things to do, and it really came to light after Rick passed away that I needed more time to do stuff that I really needed to do. I'd planned on retiring in late May anyway, and I don't know, I had two things. I had to be in Southern Nevada twice in March. I've already come and gone, and I didn't have any backup, so I just told the board the first part of February that I was on my way out.
And now the most difficult part is trying to find a replacement. And so they are advertising. They're looking for a museum director, anybody passionate about preserving and promoting the rich heritage of the American West. This is according to the press release issued by Cowboy Arts and Gear. Should email resumes to contact@cowboyartsandgearmuseum.org. And really, someone's going to need a lot of different special skills, Jan, because you had your hand in just about everything, from greeting the guests and visitors to corresponding to the exhibits, to ordering inventory for the little gift shop. I mean, you seriously did a little bit, if not all of everything.
Well, it was a one-horse show, or half a horse show when Rick was there, and yeah, you do everything from ordering, as you said, and greeting the public to being the janitor. It runs on a really slim financial margin. The beauty of the facility is NV Energy, not Nevada Energy. NV Energy is the big dogs, correct me to say, renovated and donated the building to the Cowboy Arts and Gear board. So there's no rent or payment of a building. They own the building free and clear. And there are two renters that are there. The Nevada Cattlemen's Association is upstairs. And then there's another person who just rents an office kind of as a place to have a business address more than anything. It's a great partnership with the cattlemen. They too are very nonprofit with marginal overhead. So to have a reliable building for them to be in, yet accessible to their members, is great. And Martin Paris and Sharon McKnight, the glue that holds it together. I don't know what they're going to do when Sharon decides to throw in her towel, but they're just great people. So it's been a great partnership. Running the place has been the opportunity of a lifetime. It was just time for me to do other things.
Well, you want to be in charge of punching your time card, unlike with Rick, as we talked about, that, his was punched for him, and nobody wants to. We want to do some things, right? We never know. We just don't know what's going to happen. So the older you get.
Rick was 75, and it was his time. It was his time, but it was quite abrupt, too.
Exactly. So it's an example to all of us, really.
It's a good example to all of us, too.
He lived a great life, yes.
To do things. So at the same time, I had agreed with Katie Krinka to write a little story for Everything Elko magazine. I'm on my second one. So I'll be doing that once a month, and then I'd like to volunteer at the Northeastern Nevada Museum, maybe help them out with some of their brown bag things that they do. They're kind of having a shift in doing those, and I love doing programs. They're just fun, and as you and I know from our old TV days, when you have a bunch of pictures, then those tell the story. All you need is a few words in between to clarify a few points here and there. And that's just a perfect forum to do that.
We have a beautiful archive at the museum full of photos.
Oh, they have.
Yes.
They're crammed full of photos. And they have a whole bunch now that things have gone digital. They have some that are just digital and not even available on hard copies. Oh, they probably do. But digitization has enabled old photos to be easily reproduced. Those old faded ones, I accidentally took 2 semesters of Photoshop, and you can tweak them up and restore them and make them look as good as they were the day they were taken with old funky glass plate negatives. I love history and telling these stories and keeping these stories alive, and that's what helps. If you know what's gone on in the past, then sometimes you can avoid those same mistakes, or you can work around them, and sometimes we're just stupid and we repeat the same mistakes.
Jan Petersen is our guest today, and I did want to mention too, Jan, you had a parting gift for Cowboy Arts and Gear Museum in that the preservation of that particular building with all the research that went into that. If you wouldn't mind telling us, because that's something that you're currently involved in a state position too.
Well, I'm on the State Museum and History Board. I'm the rural rep, is what I call myself. So part of that is approving placing buildings on the State Historic Register. And I started in during COVID, filling out all the paperwork. And it was very involved. And Kristen Brown, who's in charge of it at the State SHPO office, State Historic Preservation Office, helped me. And then we got to the very end of it, and they realized, and this was my fault, I did not put footnotes in. The English teachers out there are rolling their eyes. Loretta Reed's probably dying. So I had to backtrack and re-find where I had found all this information, which you write this big narrative out of why it's important and, this, that, and the other. So I backtracked and did that, and then I resubmitted it, and it's been informally approved and will be formally approved at the June meeting, which will be in Reno, I believe, and of course I'll be abstaining. But it was quite the learning process, and in doing that, I'm going through the building, and the two sides of the building, which are sandwiched in between an old bar on the east side and Ace Glass on the west, the Cowboy Arts and Beer Gear building, which was G.S. Garcia's shop, and it was built in 1907 and moved across the alley in 1913. The sides still have the original pressed tin to look like brick siding. So I was sticking my phone in between this foot-wide slot in between the two buildings and taking pictures of stamped tin bricks and just, learning things like that and appreciating those things that still endure through Elko's timeline. I've recently spent a whole lot of time in Salt Lake and driving through the avenues and looking at those beautiful restored homes, or maybe they've been kept as beautiful as they were when they were new. And the pride of those buildings downtown. Elko's taken a lot of stuff to the dumps over the years, and the lack of preservation is just sad. I'm not going to say shameful. I'm not trying to scorn people into doing, into thinking they've done something wrong, but we need to take pride in our history and our culture, and throwing up new buildings that cost a lot more instead of preserving and keeping and showing that we have pride in our history and our culture and our traditions. We need to embrace that, and we have a great opportunity of doing this. People that come to visit for the Basque Festival, the rodeo, Cowboy Poetry, the fair, they love our community. They love the closeness of it. They all remark on what a wonderful sense of community we do have. So, we don't realize this because we're here.
We're living the moment. Yeah.
We're living in the moment as it is. And nobody's ever a good tourist in their own backyard anyway, because you just think, well, that's it. So what's the big deal? But we have a treasure here.
Well, Jan, thank you. You remind us of that every time we meet. And again, that's why it's so pleasing to hear that even upon your retirement as director of the museum, Cowboy Arts and Gear Museum, you're busy working on these other projects, including the latest endeavor, which I want to encourage everyone to pick up, the Everything Elko magazine. It's fantastic anyway, but it's super special this month.
Well, Marin Wendell started it, and then Katie and Cody Krinka bought it, a year or so ago. Time flies and I never keep up. But I get to write, they're called Time Travel Tales.
Nice.
So the first one last year in March for Women's History Month was about Jane Reardon, who was a great lady cowboy, rough stock rider who was from Elko County. My mother-in-laws used to talk about her, and she met Jane as a young girl, but her mother and Jane were friends. So I thought everybody knew about Jane. This month, which is hot off the press, it's got Easter eggs on the cover, it's the April edition, is about how Elko's hillside letter came to be as a memorial for Raymond Thomas.
Oh, that's wonderful. And you've gone all the way back to 1868, because again, that is the featured story, Elko's hillside letter. So you can find out firsthand with the Time Travel Tales, authored by Jan Petersen, the story of that letter and the origin of it and the meaning behind it. And then you've got all these other great photos, fun facts built in.
The layout is, I don't know who's doing the layout, but I congratulate him. This is the most unique layout I've ever seen, and the clue to doing an old history story is the photos, and then the cut lines and the stories, and then there's always a good backstory or two to these. So this tells how Elko's E, which is not, as May Steniger emphasized to me the other day, the E is not for Elko Mountain. That's the one to the east. And the E is not for east, as I had some lady insist telling me a couple years ago, which I never thought about it, but it does kind of face east, which is a coincidence. But it was put out, Hillside Letters started out as a popular Western event. We have, we're full of mountains here in the West. It actually started at Cal Berkeley in 1906 with the big C for Cal. And then other universities and high schools thought, well, this is a cool idea. So they too started putting up hillside letters. And this young teacher at Elko County High School, which was the first publicly funded with taxation dollars high school in the state of Nevada, in 1896, I still think of it as the old library, but it's the public defender's office now. That building was built, and it had a second story. My grandma went to school there. During World War II, they had a fire, and so they put on a roof, intending to fix it someday. Well, 70-some years later, someday still hasn't arrived. But back to the story, Raymond Thomas talked the entire 125 member student body of Elko High School and the Block E Society, which were the boys who were the athletes, of course. Well, but girls were playing basketball then too. To put this letter on the mountain just south and east of Elko. So they measured it out on an October day, 300 feet long, 60 feet wide, and they chopped down all the sagebrush and everything, had it all lined out. And they were going to go on a hike up Lamoille Canyon. And there was a flume that ran. There was a little dam and water just above where the scout camp now is. Scout camp wasn't there yet. And this wooden flume made out of redwood sort of meandered its way down the canyon. And then it diverted into machinery that converted the water into electricity, hydropower. Right there, that's why those picnic grounds at the base of the canyon are called the Powerhouse Picnic Ground. Powerhouse, because that's where the powerhouse was. And that lit Elko and Lamoille Valley, which is pretty new age stuff then in 1913. So in October of 1916, the high school kids, the big deal thing was to go climb the flume and walk the flume. It was covered in spots. In places, it was like 10, 15 feet off the ground. And it looked like a roller coaster track. So as a kid, this looks really exciting. As a parent, it looks rather dangerous, or a lot dangerous.
And there are some pictures of this that date to 1916 that you'll see.
There's great pictures that the museum, Northeastern Nevada Museum, had. So I got out these pictures, and my grandma talked about doing the flume, and her sister and my mother-in-law. I've had lots of people tell me how exciting this was. And like the girls, they would be bold, and they would borrow overalls from their brothers instead of
because they weren't wearing pants. Yes.
And all that great side story stuff.
They had to wear skirts and dresses to school.
So they were exploring the flume. And this day in early October 1916, after they cleared off the E, and this giant storm came up. And Professor Thomas gets the students down the hill, and he's like 25 years old. He taught manual arts, which was now called woodshop, and he collapsed and died.
After he got them all down to safety.
After he got them all down. So, of course, there's big turmoil and drama about that. And it had snowed that day, so looking out, in spite of this tragedy, is this big white E on the hill.
Because they'd already
cleared it
out.
off. They were ready. All they had to do was to paint it or whitewash it somehow. So the idea just kind of faded away. But then the next fall of 1917, after things sort of settled down, and at the same time Elko had become incorporated, they decided to continue this project, and they continued. They painted the E that they already had staked out, so the hard part was done. But they also arranged with the Forest Reserve, which we know now as the Forest Service, to have the canyon just above the flume named in honor of Raymond Thomas. And that's how Thomas Kenyon was named.
Oh,
So it's one of those community stories, the why of who was Thomas. The why of these stories is what's the fun part.
and Jan, this is a beautiful story that you've written again in Everything Elko, and it's illustrated with these historic photos. And as you said, it's just the second. You're planning to do one every month, right?
Every month.
Yes.
I've got half a list, and if anybody's got a request, let me know.
Or if you even have photos, because maybe there are photos of something that no one has seen before. I mean, those
Yeah.
are so exciting. It's like making an archaeological discovery, opening a tomb, if you will.
And that there's photos in old albums. And Rosie Reagan shared with me some albums that were grandparents that had these treasureful, wonderful pictures of the Garcia building when I was putting together the historic narrative. Oh, they were a huge help to me so there's other pictures like that. There's still, I think, pictures in drawers.
So don't
They're
toss
not all
them.
on hard drives.
Right. And you can still keep them for your family because the Northeastern Nevada Museum will gladly replicate them. You keep the originals, but at least they will be intact in the archives for all to enjoy for coming decades.
And we all should share them. There's no
Sure.
sense holding them hostage.
Elko's very own time traveler, that is Jan Petersen, our guest today. Now I have a new name for you. Since you're retired from the museum, I'll call you the time traveler.
Well, Sid McMullen says reading old newspapers and looking at old photos is as close to time travelers we're going to get. I'm still trying to figure out how to take a time warp back, but...
And I met someone, well, actually, I'd known him for a while, but I didn't realize how much appreciation he has for local history or the place of where he and his family. Professor Ethan Hockley from Great Basin College is a big fan of yours, Jan. And you guys are working on a project, in fact, for Good Friday, that will include something that you're also very good at. And you really instilled in him a greater appreciation for the city cemetery and all those beautiful headstones and that historic section of our cemetery. All the stories that are told there are waiting to be told.
Well, everybody has a story. Good, bad, indifferent. Everyone has a story. So, and I haven't done one for a while. I used to do 5th grade cemetery tours and a couple of grown-up ones too. So Ethan's got this Good Friday project going that will take place this Friday, which is
29th.
The 29th, thank you, ma'am. In that little parking lot in the center of the Elko Cemetery, there's the shop building and the office building, and Ethan's going to borrow some chairs, and he's got people lined up to do some poetry readings, which will be a great thing in itself, from 4 to 6, and then at 6 o'clock, I'll do a brief cemetery tour. I think I'll just stay in the middle part. And it could be cold, so come prepared with warm clothes. And we'll just do a quick cemetery tour and talk about some etiquette and some good stories of who was there. And
there are some fantastic stories, and some families are even struck by, the simplicity of a small stone or maybe a child that died. Or then there are there's a family mausoleum, for example, in our city cemetery.
Which would, if you were to build one now, I've done the math, it's like $130,000.
Wow. Well,
to build the Russell Mausoleum down in the Masonic Cemetery. Well, actually, it's in the Oddfellows.
And
side.
he was significant because?
Well, he was a rancher and owned ranches in Lander and Elko County. And then he also was a partner in what's now Everton. I still call it Bodley's. It was W.T. Smith, and it was Russell Company before that. That building probably dates back. It's been updated. Actually, it's 3 different buildings.
Because Reinhardt's is there, too.
Reinhardt's as well. There's the Silver Dollar on the corner, down in the 400 block of commercial.
Thank you, Sam, for caretaking that place.
And Sam is he takes such pride in it, and it's such a cool, funky building. But it was built as a bank, That's why it's called the silver dollar, in the early 1870s. And actually, there was a bank on that lot in 1869, Elko's first year. Then next to it is the Reinhardts, who were Jewish merchants. There were Jewish merchants all over northern Nevada, beginning with the railroad. They took advantage of the opportunity of these new booming towns and booming mining towns and moved in and opened mercantiles of all sorts. Then next to that is Machi's, which was, among other things, Elko's first city hall.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I thought at some point it was a newspaper office, but it was City Hall.
Well, and it was the Elko Independent for what most of us remember it as.
Wow.
And it was Reardon Plumbing and Heating at one point. And then Ogie Deli next to it is another one that's got a great history. And then there were two little wood frame ones. Marcel Goitia, in my time, had a pool hall there, and it was Roop's Pool Hall before that, just a variety of stuff. And on the corner, the Alexanders had another mercantile, and it was called the Elk Hotel, and that was one of Elko's first hotels, which
in the
sounds
vicinity
pretty fancy.
Of Stockman's? Is that Elko? Okay.
One more block down at 5th and Commercial.
Oh, okay, going that way. Okay, wow, fascinating.
Yeah.
And we must have Sanborn maps or something that reflect these addresses.
Yes, and Sanborn maps, which are online through the Library of Congress. The Library of Congress has a ton of free stuff that is accessible and available to absolutely anybody. To go poking around there, you can do word searches, all sorts of stuff, and they've got some archived newspapers up to about World War I. That's another one of my projects in the offing. I want to find out how to get more newspapers online. I think it takes some grants and some digging, but...
What a great idea, yeah. Jan, thank you. I just want to make sure that because we'll visit frequently now that you... when it used to be when I would request Jan to come in for our noon show, she'd need to, get some help. You'd have Danny to come in and sit in at the museum while she headed down here. So now a little more time, obviously, but I appreciate your availability. I just want to make sure people realize that, you're still doing all this good work. You are working on these projects. You're writing for Everything Elko. You're doing tours. You'll be doing ghost tours again.
Oh, I can't wait to do ghost tours. The last two, I don't even know what the dates are, but it will be the last 2 weekends in October, Nevada Day. 49 other states, it's known as Halloween. But they're just so fun telling these stories and keeping these history stories alive. I came across a great quote yesterday from Mark Twain that said, "There's nothing worse than having something about a good story ruined by the arrival of an eyewitness."
Boy, wasn't he a great newspaperman?
And I could just hear Scott Glennon going on and on with that line.
Yeah, definitely. Well, what fun. We look forward to that for sure. In the meantime, you'll have your travels, doing your work on behalf of the state. And as you said, volunteering at the Northeastern Nevada Museum. I don't mind saying, since I shared it on my social media page, that you were my write-in candidate for the museum board of directors. So maybe at least we get the attention.
I don't think that's going far, but oh well.
But even if you just got 5 votes, they were votes in confidence. So we appreciate what you do, Jan, and the fact that you're going to contribute to, continuing the preservation, the history
I think
of Elko.
about it. I was inspired by Edna Patterson and my grandma, who were the bestest of friends, and Edna wrote all that stuff, and my grandma did a lot of the research for her. And my dad loved history. I don't think he knew any different. His grandpa lived with him and used to talk about, he came here in 1873, and there were still people traveling by wagon train if you couldn't afford train fare, or if you were going elsewhere than just straight east-west. So as our oldest Paul says, look what he did to us.
I don't think if you had ever even wanted to move somewhere,
we
live
don't know
somewhere
any
else,
different.
You couldn't do it because it literally is in your blood. So for
It
how many
is.
generations now?
5, I think.
Really?
1869.
The initial Petersen clan arrived. Well, different, not.
Well, yeah. In fact, my great-great-grandpa was maybe even the first it wouldn't have been the superintendent, well, maybe the superintendent of schools.
The equivalent of?
The equivalent of Elijah Yates.
Wow. Yates.
Sometimes he's probably rolling over in his grave over what's going now, but.
And Jessie Yates, I've seen her photo, just beautiful. Such a tender young
Yeah, that
woman.
was his daughter.
Yeah, how sweet. Oh, so lots and lots of very rich personal family history. And I think that, Jan's love of history is certainly contagious. And anybody who is interested in, there's a lot of genealogy that goes on here, and people love.
Genealogy is one of the funnest things you can do. I call it digging up dead people. It's just fun.
Well, and it's great to continue those stories and that kind of.
It is.
Yes.
It gives you the connection.
And hopefully we can do better in the future with the actual preservation of some of our buildings and the things that are dear to us.
I'm inspired, and now that this one's gone through, I've got some ideas to do a couple of others.
Well, there you are. Jan, thank you.
I'll just make footnotes this time.
Okay. The best way to get in touch with you is through your social, because now that you're not at the museum,
I've
just
got a Facebook, or track me down at KELK.
Right. Petersen, please. Jan Petersen. Yes. Thanks, Jan, for being
All right.
Yeah,
Thanks.
our guest. Yeah, it's always great catching up with you, Jan. Thank you, listeners, for supporting our radio show here on Elko Live on KELK. We're archived ourselves at elkoradio.com, and we're streaming worldwide at elkoradio.com.